important thing and very basic thing in Python, that is variables and data types. So as you guys know, like basic definition of what a variable is, right? So in mathematics, a variable is basically defined as a character, an alphabetical character. For example, it's x or y that we consider in mathematics equation that stores a certain value, right? So in the same way, a Python also has a variable that basically stores any kind of an integer value, and that need not to be an integer value. It can be any kind of a value, whether be it an integer, a string, or a character, or float point, whatever it is. And the character in which you are storing those things are known as your variables. Right? And then we'll also be focusing on certain data types which are inbuilt in the Python language, such as your strings list or dictionary and all of these things. Right? So so basically, what happens in Python is that whenever you run a particular program, let's say, there are certain ways in which you want your Python to interpret whatever value you are assigning to a certain thing, right? In whatever programming language, need not be this in Python. It can be in any kind of a programming language, whether be it C or Perl or whatever different language there is, right? So what happens is when you write a program, you write a character. It can be any character which is given by the user, but it can't be a character, as I already told you in the last lecture, which is it can't be a character such as else or for, because those have some inbuilt function in Python. So that is not that can't be a user defined name, right? So you can write any name like A, B, C, D, whatever it is, and then you assign a value to this particular character. Now what happens in Python is that you don't need to assign the value externally to a particular character. It automatically takes the value, and that automatic value thing that the character takes is given by this equal to sign. So as soon as you write an equal to sign in front of a character or a variable here, it automatically knows that the user is saying me that you have to store this particular value. So it will assign a certain amount of memory in the Python to that particular variable, so that whenever you call that particular variable, whatever name that you have given to that variable, whenever you will call that, it will automatically predict the path where it has stored that particular variable, and it will give you the corresponding value of that variable. So whatever you have written on the left hand side of your equal to sign, as I already told you in the last section, it is also known as a variable, and whatever you have given on the right hand side of equal to sign, that is known as the value, right? So we can just so everyone has opened their PyCharm, right? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So assigning is a very basic thing, right? Let's say we write a is equal to, let's say, 10. So that means we have instructed Python to start a variable by store a particular value, that is 10. Now this 10 is an integer. Can anyone tell me why it is an integer? Why not a floating point?
Because there's no decimal.
So whenever we write a decimal, that becomes a floating point, right? So this is an integer. So here what this means is that we are instructing Python to start a variable a and store a value 10. In the same way, we can write, let's say, b, and this is equal to, let's say, 100.0. So this becomes a float point, right? In the same way, you can assign a variable c to Python and store a string in it as well, which can be anything. Let's say I write India. So string, as you all know, when we write a large amount of character or like a sequence of character, and when we write it in double quotes or single quotes, that becomes a string, right? So in this way, you can just store these particular value, and when you will call it, you can write the print function. Now, one more thing that you have to keep in mind is that whatever you write in the parentheses for a predefined function of Python, for example, print is a predefined function of Python, and whatever you write in the parentheses is called as the argument of that particular function, right? So somewhere you might see some technical terms known like argument something. So don't be confused. Argument is just basically what is written in the parentheses for a particular inbuilt or predefined function for a Python language, right? So here what happens when you write print, now there is one more thing to keep in mind. You can write print in this way as well, A, but what this means is that Python thinks that the user is asking me to print A, not the value of A, because you have written A in a double quotes or single quotes, right? So whenever you write something in the argument of print, and when you write it in double quotes or single quotes, Python will not print the corresponding value of that variable. It will always just print the variable itself, right? It won't print the value. So if I run my program, you see it just gave me the output as A, right? Because Python doesn't understand this. In a general way, when we talk, I can like personally say to anyone, okay, give me the value of A, and you will say, oh, A is 10. So 10 is the value of A, but Python doesn't function like that. Because here Python thinks that user is asking me to print A, not the value of A. So to print the value of A, what you just need to do is that just delete the quotes, right? And just type print A, and then it will give you the output 10. So now Python understands that, okay, the user is asking me to print the value of A rather than just printing A, right? So in the same way, you can like print B, and you can write print C, and when you print it, it will give you the corresponding values that you have. So for A, it has given you 10, for B, it has given you 100.0, and for C, it has given you 100. Now, if you want to make it more interactive or more like if you want your output to be more understandable, what you can do is that you can write it in this way. The value of A is, right, in this way. Now what happens is when you whatever you, as you all know, whatever you have written in double quotes, Python will print it as it is, right? But now you want Python to give you the value of A. So how to do this? You have written this line, so Python will print the value of A is as it is, and then you have to give the value of A, what the A is, what the A stores for. So when you do this, then the Python will give you an output saying the value of A is 10, right? So in this way also you can make it more interactive, more understandable, the output that you have, right? The same way, same goes for here as well. So whatever you have written in double quotes, Python will print it as it is, and whatever you have given when you directly write a variable, the Python will print that value of that variable, right? Is it clear with everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Also, what you can do is that you can do multiple assignments, multiple alignment to these variables as well. So what we can do is that sometimes it becomes really hectic. Now here we have only 3 variables, right? So it is easy for us to individually add or individually write or individually give a value to these variables. But sometimes what happens is you have multiple variables with you, and at that time it becomes really tough for you to write individually or give individual values to these variables, right? So what you can do is you can give them multiple values in a single line itself. So let's say I am running a mathematical equation, and I have 3 variables A, B, and C, and all of these 3 variables have the same name. So right, so instead of writing it as this, A equals to 1, B equals to 1, C equals to 1, instead of writing it in this way, what you can do is you can just write it in this way. You can just write it in this way: A equals to B equals to C equals to 1. So what is happening here is that you are instructing Python to make 3 variables for you, that is A, B, and C, and give those variables or allow those variables to store the value as 1. So if simultaneously you have given all these 3 values, right? And then you can obviously go for with like the print function, print A, print B, and print C. And when you will print it, it will give you 3 values like 1, 1, 1. So it has given you the value of A, B, and C as well, right? In the same way, what you can do is that instead of doing it in this way, you can, in a single line, you can assign values to 3 different variables as well. Like let's say I have 3 variables A, B, and C, and I have to assign them values. So instead of writing these variables in different line, you can write it in the same line and then give those values. Let's say I give a value of 1 to A, 2 to B, and let's say I write a string here as well. Let's say in C I write India, right? And then I give my print function, print A, print B, and print C. So it will give me the values for A, B, and C. So 1, 2, and India. It has given me these values, right? So this is what is known as a multiple assignments of the values to a particular variable. So instead of writing these variables in individual lines, you can just write it in a single line and give these variables like a particular value and then just print it according to your need, right? Is this clear with everyone? Anyone has any doubt about it till now?
No. Sir.
Okay. So moving forward now, so this was the very basic of what variables is and how you can assign values to these variables. The next thing that we have to understand is what are data types. Now what data types stands for is that in Python, there are various kind of data that you have, right? For example, when you collect a data, when you go out and do a survey, you collect different types of data. For example, age or height or weight or color. So these are different kind of data types that you have. So in the same way, Python also have different kind of data types, and there are basically 5 types of data that Python has, which is inbuilt in it. These are known as numbers, strings, list, tuple, and dictionary. So these are 5 basic kinds of data types that are there in the or pre-built in Python, right? So we'll be focusing on each one of them. The first one is numbers. So numbers, as you all know, is a very basic type of number thing that is which will store a particular numeric value for you, and the number of objects are created when you assign them a particular value, as we have already seen in the previous programming, where A equals to 1 or B equals to 2. So this is what you are doing, is basically giving a numeric value to a particular variable, right? Now what happens is Python supports 4 different types of a numerical type. So in numerical type, it also has different types. So in numerical type, there are different kind of numerics, such as integer function, as we all know, like when it is 1, so it is integer 10, 100, these all are integers. And when you write a decimal to it, then it becomes a floating point real value. Apart from these 2 type of numeric values, it also supports 2 more type of numeric values. One which is known as a long integer, and these long integers are basically written in the form of an octal or hexadecimal. Now we know that basically in a programming language, the base language that any kind of programming system associates with is 0 and 1, like binary system basically. But apart from binary system, we also have different kind of system like hexadecimal or octal. These are different kind of systems which are there. So and currently there are certain packages built not just in Python, but there are also different kind of programming languages that are being built now, which actually utilizes hexadecimal and octal rather than going for a binary system. Because what happens in binary is that you just have 2 numbers, 0 and 1, and just based on those 2, you have to define everything so that the computer or the package can understand what the user is giving to it, right? So for example, 0 1 1 1 0 0, something like that, whatever random arrangement of zeros and ones, right? So then it becomes quite difficult to extract those values because it is just zeros and ones. So instead of using those things, people are now trying to move their focus and building a programming language that is actually based on the usage of octal and hexadecimals, right? And also you can use complex numbers that you guys might have studied in mathematics. So a complex number basically consists of 2 main portions. The first is known as a real part, and another one which is known as the imaginary portion, which is always accompanied by an imaginary number I, that is also known as iota, whose value is root over minus 1, right? So these are the examples of these different numeric type. For example, in int, you will have 10, 100, negative 459, something like this, right? 0 times 55. These are all integer number. In long numbers, what happens is that whenever you are defining a long integer to a Python, you always have to follow it with L, whether be it capital L or a small l. But sometimes people, like majority times, people use capital L only, not small l, because then it becomes quite complex for you to differentiate between whether it is small l or it is 1 or it is I, whatever it is, right? So it's better to use capital L. So we will be seeing how to use these long integers. It is like when the programming becomes quite complex, then we will like look for how to write long and how to give a long integer value to a variable. And these are the examples of float, and E basically stands for 10, right? So this becomes 4.3 into 10 raised to the power of 18, something like that, right? And these are decimals, so then it becomes floating number. It can be negative as well as positive, and these are the complex numbers here, right? Now Python, so this is one thing that I've already told you, that instead of using small l, you can always go for capital L, because then it becomes quite easy for you to differentiate between 1 and I, or whatever it is. And a complex number, as you all know, it consists of a real part as well as an imaginary portion, and it is of something like this format, x plus yj, or in programming terms we use j, but in mathematical terms we use I basically. So don't get confused here, like what is the basic difference, right? So we can just give a short example of what number things here. So this is basically what a number is actually, right? So you have given a particular value to A, B, and C, and you have assigned a value. So this is basically 1 into a numeric type of value, and when you print it, it will give you just 1 into, and you can change it to, let's say, 2.0, then it becomes floating point, and then when you print it, it will give you 1 and 2.0. That's a really basic understanding of a numerical data type. So the next data type is known as strings. So what is string? So string is, so anyone has any doubt up until now? You can just write it in the chat box.
No.
So what are strings? So strings are basically a combination of, or a sequence of characters, alphabetical characters that you write, and it should always be in a single quote or a double quote. Now the difference that we were talking in the last lecture about single, double, and triple quotes. So let me just show you a very brief example of how these things work. So as I already told you about commenting, so when we write anything in a triple quote, like 1, 2, 3, and whatever I write in between this, that comes in my commenting system. So when I run a code, Python won't recognize this as a valid code, whatever there is in between your triple quotes. And people usually use triple quotes to write a long paragraphs. So when you want to write a very long paragraph about something, what your programming is, or what you're mainly focusing on doing in this particular programming type, then you can always go for a triple quotes. Now Python doesn't discriminate, and another type of commenting is you can always use a hashtag, and then that particular line becomes a comment out. So let's say if I have given a particular value a equals to 10, and I write a hash here, then what happens is this particular line. So whatever you have written in line number 2, starting from A up until end of the line 2, it will all be commented out. But as soon as you go in line number 3, whatever you write won't be commented out, right? So this thing you have to keep in mind. And let's say if you want to you have written something of this sort, let's say c equals to 50, something like this, and you want to comment out all these three things together. So what you guys can do, just copy like highlight these three together, press control and forward slash. So automatically it will comment out whatever lines you want, right? You don't have to individually comment out each and every line. And if you want to decomment it, just again press control and forward slash, and it will decomment it, right? So this is one way of commenting things. Now what happens in string is you always have to write certain characters in a single quote or a double quote. Now Python doesn't discriminate between what you have written in a single quote and what you have written in a double quote. It is same for Python. It doesn't matter whatever you write in single quote or double quote. So for example, if I write something, let's say print, and in single quotes I write hello, right? So you can see when I print it, it will give me hello, right? And let's say now I change this single quotes into double quotes, and now I print it, so it will again give me hello, right? So Python doesn't actually discriminate whatever you have written in single quotes and double quotes, and, unless it is whatever you have written is like in a valid format, right? So to write a string, the way to construct a string is just you have to write a sequence of characters, whatever it can be, and just include those characters into a single quote or a double quote, and then that thing will be converted into a string. Okay. Now what happens is once you've written the string, now constructing a string is not a very like a tough job. You can easily create a string. The next important thing that follows this is how you will be able to actually access individual characters from those strings, right? So for that, we use what is known as the slicing operators, which is denoted by square brackets or a square bracket with a colon in it, right? So what happens here is that, let's say I have written a particular string and I write str short for string, and I've given it a name, let's say India, right? Now what happens is if I ask you to tell me what is the second element of this string. So if can anyone tell me what is the second element of this particular string in India?
N.
No,
N.
no. Anyone else? Okay. So what you have to keep this thing in mind is when we talk to each other, right? For us, the second element is n, right? But for Python, the second element is not n, because in any kind of programming language, whenever you start a string, whenever you write a string, the indexing of those elements always starts from zero, right? So for us, I will be the first element in India, but for Python, I will be the zeroth element, right? For us, n will be the second element, but for Python, n will be the first element. For us, d will be the third element, but for Python, d will be the second element, right? So it starts from zero. Always remember this. Whenever you are writing a string, your indexing will always start from zero. It won't start from one. And by indexing, I mean giving a individual value to these individual characters, like assigning a particular value to these individual characters. So the indexing will always starts from zero. It won't start from one, right? Now, let's say you have written this string, but the next thing is how would you access the individual characters from it? How would you do it, right? So for that, we have what is known as slice operators. So what you can do is you can just write print, right? And I want my let's say second element of this string. So what I will do is I will write str. That is, first I will access my string. So first I'm giving the function, I'm giving the command print to Python, saying that print something for me. And what do I want to print? I want to print my string. And in that string, I want to print my second element. So how would you access your second element? You will just write, give a square bracket, and you will write 2. So what this command stands for is you are asking Python to print the second element of the string that you have just defined. So the second element here will be D. So in our output, I should get a D here, right? And it gives me a D. Okay. So in this way, you can access any kind of element in this one. Let's say sometimes what happen is you might say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it is 5, and you will write, let's say, 5 here, and then you print. So it should give us an error, right? Obviously, because what kind of error is it is known as an index error. Why? Because as you all know, indexing always starts from zero, right? So if sometimes you get an index error, then you should go and always check your string, that whether you have given the right index or not. So here the index always ends at 4, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So because there is no indexing as 5, therefore it gave us an error saying that string index is out of range, because our range is from 0 till 4, not 5. So I have to write 4 here, and then it will give me the last element, that is A. Okay. Is this clear with everyone?
So
Yes.
what?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah, sure.
So, so here we just took an example of one string, which is India, and then we defined the elements and we found the output. But what if we are writing a code where we have to define multiple such strings?
Okay, so what happens, let's say we take an example of a sentence, right? Let's say India is a country. Now here in this string, you have 4 types of characters in it, right? I'll come to your example. I got your example. You are saying that we have multiple strings, like string 1, string 2, string 3, this way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so we will come to that, because for accessing that thing, we have to first understand the basics of dictionary and tuples, and then we will be able to clarify how to access those things, right? So let's say what happens here is you have a particular string which consists of these 4 letters, right? Now, let's say you want to, okay, what happens in Python is that this is a space. This space is also counted as a indexing number, right? So it's not like for us this space has no value, null value, but for Python this space also has an indexing. So we know that this a ended at index number 4, so this space will be given as an index number 5, and then this I will become index number 6, right? So keep this thing in mind. And what happens is, this is how you will obtain a single string, single character from that particular string. Let's say you want a range of string. Let's say in India, India is a country, this is a particular sentence, and in this one I want a range. So for range, what we do is that we use a colon here, right? And then you can define from which indexing till which indexing you want to access the string, right? Let's say I want to access this string from element number 2 to element number, let's say I give 6 or 8, let's say, right? So now what happens here is that this is a very basic thing, but majority of students make a big mistake here. This range, how it happens is, it will always start with the index number 2, but it won't go till index number 8. It will always count one less than what you have given. So it will start from 2, but it will only count till 7. It won't count till 8, right? So if you want, you guys can note this. It will always count one less than what you have given in the range, right? And when you print it, so you get dia is, right? Because D is our second element. So second, third, fourth. This is space is fifth. This is sixth. I is sixth, and S is 7, right? So this gives us dia is, right? So in this way, you can access like a range of elements within a string as well. Also, what you can do is, let's say I want to access from my second element till the last element. So you don't actually, so there are two ways. Either you can count all the indexing, and then you can write the index number that y ends at, or the next best or the easy way to do is